Castle of Fear is not an official episode title of the streets of San Francisco, yet it feels like an invisible chapter that exists between frames, woven into the atmosphere of the series itself, because fear in this show is never confined to a single crime or villain, but embedded in the architecture of the city, the psychology of its inhabitants, and the generational tension between experience and idealism embodied by Lieutenant Mike Stone and Inspector Steve Heller, and when watching the 1972 series. Today, through the conceptual lens of Castle of Fear, the show transforms from a procedural drama into a meditation on authority, vulnerability, and the uneasy contract between law and the people it claims to protect. From the opening sequences of the series, San Francisco is not presented as a postcard city, but as a living organism, fog-heavy with secrets, streets steep enough to isolate communities, and neighborhoods divided not only by geography but by history, and fear in this environment is subtle, rarely explosive, often internalized, manifesting in hesitation, silence, and the slow erosion of trust. Stone represents an older form of authority, shaped by wars, institutional loyalty, and a belief that order, while imperfect, is preferable to chaos, whereas Heller arrives with youthful skepticism, emotional immediacy, and a readiness to question motives even within the badge itself, and their dynamic becomes the core narrative engine through which Castle of Fear operates. Because the real fortress is not a building but the mental structure that officers and civilians alike construct to shield themselves from uncertainty. Scene by scene, the show repeatedly stages confrontations where the crime itself feels almost secondary to the emotional aftermath. A widow who cannot articulate her loss, a suspect who fears the system more than guilt, a witness whose silence is motivated not by malice, but by survival, and these moments accumulate into a portrait of a city where fear is negotiated rather than eradicated. One of the most striking aspects of the series, especially when viewed through this thematic framing, is its refusal to portray the police as omniscient or morally uncomplicated, because Stone often hesitates, doubts, and recalibrates, while Heller's empathy sometimes leads him into danger or misjudgment, and this balance prevents the show from becoming propaganda, instead positioning it as a conversation with the viewer about responsibility. I remember watching an episode late at night years ago and realizing that the most unsettling scenes were not the confrontations, but the pauses afterward. Stone standing alone in an empty hallway, Heller staring out over the city. Moments where the characters process the cost of intervention, and Castle of Fear becomes the name for that emotional residue, the weight that remains once the case is closed but the damage persists. Compared to other crime dramas of the era, The Streets of San Francisco is less interested in spectacle and more invested in consequence, and this is where it diverges sharply from shows that treat fear as an external threat to be neutralized, because here fear is internal, systemic, and often justified. The city itself functions as a character, its bridges symbolizing connection and isolation simultaneously, its hills creating blind spots both literal and metaphorical, and the series repeatedly uses these spaces to stage encounters where power is unstable, where an officer's authority can evaporate with a single wrong word or gesture. Castle of Fear also resonates as a reflection of its historical moment, a time when public trust in institutions was fragile, when law enforcement was scrutinized, and when television began to allow ambiguity into its heroes, and watching it now, that ambiguity feels not dated but prescient. There is a quiet courage in how the show allows fear to exist without immediately resolving it, how it permits characters to be changed by what they witness rather than restored to equilibrium by the end credits, and this is perhaps why the series lingers in memory long after individual plots fade. Castle of Fear, as a conceptual reading, reframes the entire series as an exploration of how authority survives only when it acknowledges its own limits, and how fear, when denied, becomes destructive, but when confronted, can become a catalyst for restraint, empathy, and cautious hope.